Okay. You may have known, first of all, welcome everybody to our spring Total Partners Luncheon meeting, first one of the year. The pictures that we have up, well, obviously that's one that was taken at our last meeting, which is when we started the 2021 fund. And all of the pictures that had been playing in the background here were the pictures that I loaded, that I used in our reporting. And it's in chronological order. It shows the history. So if you've been looking at those, you'll have seen we'll see it in the snow, drilling in the snow. You'll see the frac job. You'll see the aerials. I mean, everything that's going on. And we've made a tremendous amount of progress in the 2021 fund. Before I start, I want to introduce some special guests today. We have our accountant here, Clayton Woodrum, CPA. And all of our taxes are done, right, Clay? And I think we had all the K-1s out for all of those that chronically missing their K-1s. We still get emails every day. But we got them, again, this year. Okay, we have a special guest today who I'm going to introduce in a moment to make a presentation, Michael Smith. Michael is a geologist consulting with us now. And we go back a number of years. Michael met him originally, I think, in '09 when we started our first program. And he was doing the geology on the hunting for Gillum, SPS exploration. So Mike was at one of our first meetings at the Marriott, I think it was, Southern Hills Marriott. And anyway, we reconnected here several months ago, and I asked him to look at some other prospects. And we got to visiting, and he showed me what he's been doing. And it's real promising, and so that's part of what we're going to discuss today. Let's see, who else? We have Teresa here, our accounting manager, with us today. All right, today, I'm going to get our slideshow off here. And boom. Okay. There we go. This is a conventional prospect that Michael is going to visit with us about today. He's the geologist. We have formed a new entity, Total Seismic Partners is the name. And the reason we're doing that is because we are going, prior to drilling the prospect, if we drill the prospect, we're going to do a seismic study. And Mike's going to explain that process and how that works. And we've already advanced funds, or I have, to get started, to secure the acreage and to secure the contract with the people that do the processing. And Mike will discuss who those people are. Mike has a particular expertise in the central Oklahoma, Cherokee Platform area. This is central, northeast, or eastern central Oklahoma, in an area called the Seminole Uplift. It's an area of prolific production. Many of the local oil magnate names that you know, like Skelly and Getty and Sinclair, Magnolia, which was the predecessor to ExxonMobil, all of those people got their start in the 20s in this area. And technology has changed dramatically since then, but the Cherokee Platform, it's relatively shallow. Our prospects are around 3,400 feet. So it makes it real cost effective, and being a conventional prospect, much less expensive than the horizontal wells that we've been participating in. Okay, to finish up what we were going to discuss on, we'll talk a little bit more about the 2021 fund. As most of you know, we've been sending out reports daily now. We're completing the first frac job on the first well. The frac crew will move to the Hunter location mid next week. We'll implement the frac job there, and then by the third week of April, we will hopefully have 2 of the wells out of 4 flowing back for the 2021 fund. Dave is hopeful that we can even get some revenues for a May distribution. So money's going to start flowing back. I did talk to Glenn Hudgens last week. Glenn gave me an update on our Cooley Field prospect. Those are the 2 deep gas wells that we're recompleting. Land work, the title work has been extremely complicated, and that's what's part of what's taken time to get it online. Glenn assures me, though, that we are very close to getting all that finalized, expects to complete the recompletion within 45 days. We'll have those wells then flowing back with our with our Robertson wells in May. So June will really be probably our first month where we will see some substantial cash distribution from those activities. So before we move on to our new prospect with Mike, does anybody have any questions on where we are on the 2021 thing? Okay, we've been doing a good job of reporting. We send a lot of stuff out. Okay, Mike, if you would mind, come up here, and I'll let you. Mike was good enough to put together this presentation, and here is the, right here, to advance the slides.
You got it.
Right there, and here is a pointer. Mike?
Get dangerous with this. Everybody falls asleep, huh? All right. All right, I'll set it right here. Anyway, my name's Michael Smith. I've been a geologist since the 70s, probably, actually since I was born. I love to be out there picking up rocks and figure out what they are and so forth. But went to Purdue University up in Indiana, and found my way down to Oklahoma in the mid-70s, and went to work for several companies then. Went independent in '83, so I've been independent ever since then. And like I tell some of my friends, I say I get to fire myself on Fridays and rehire myself on Mondays. But it doesn't happen. I'm working weekends too. But love geology, and it never stops, and there's always something that's interesting. What really is, people think is the driving force. They think that the product is the driving force, the price, and it's really not the price of oil that really drives anything. It's what you do with it, and that's my credo. It's what you do with it. You can come up with projects that are drillable, very economic at $25 oil, and of course anything above that's nice. It's icing on the cake, or the new technology opens up another play, or just there's always something happening, fracking, and it allows you to open up zones that you remember, and you remember where you can go back and use that new technology. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and you all are participating in some of that fun now. And fortunately, we're taking advantage of the higher oil prices. But more importantly, we need to just keep on finding that oil and bring it to the surface. The project, the Lee Springs and East Asher project, is just northwest of Ada, Oklahoma. Dave Robertson's hometown, right there, the operator from some of your projects, and it's in an area that was drilled early on. Matter of fact, some of the early wells by the majors, they just put out a budget for 20 wells that would go down to 6,500 feet, and they would go along just south of I-40. Every 5 miles, they drill a well. All they do is they collect samples, logs on it, and they were called stratigraphic test. They were trying to figure out what the heck was, the geology going from east-west across this area, because there's so many zones that had the capability of flowing oil and gas. And so this is near that area, that historic area. And matter of fact, this area also is the little epicenter of early drilling, where all cable tool. Cable tool was where ramming a pipe down into the ground with what they called a bit on the bottom. It didn't look like much, but they would make a core, bring it up, dump the rocks on the surface, and they keep on going on down until they found something that would have oil in it. And then they would do one of those high-tech frac techniques. They'd get a quart bottle full of nitroglycerin, and they would lower it down real slow, and then put another one right on top of that. And some of the wells that I've read about had upwards of 50 quarts of nitroglycerin sitting down in the hole. And then they dropped this 8 or 10 foot long rod down to the bottom of it, and of course, big explosion. And that was high tech. And it would make a hole down there sometimes big enough to put a Volkswagen Bug down there. And of course, that's how they brought those early wells in. But they had the same thing that we had to do, is find the right zones to do this with. And with the technology that we have today, we don't have to use that nitro, but we have other things that are quite effective. The Lee Springs and East Asher project are conventional. They're vertical wells, and they there we go. And they're in an area that has been productive for a long period of time. Like I said, and this is a chart of the oil prices. In green, here's $3. Between 0 and 10, here's $3. And you can see from 1860s all the way 1929, it was $1.27. And it didn't go above $3 until the 1970, when all of a sudden it pops on up here. And so there's reasons for that. And one is its use. Oil was only being used for a couple of things. Other products, products that are just starting to make gasoline. And this is in the Three Sands, Oklahoma, which is a town just in Payne County. And it doesn't exist anymore. They moved it because the river there flooded it out, so they moved it. And the whole town's different. But in Three Sands, in the middle of the street, you can see some old vehicles out there. But this is a gas pump sitting in the middle of the road. And that's what you'd see. So that was one of the first products and only products you had from oil. Another thing we're talking about is technology. And we were talking about that early fracking, high technology. This is a picture of some rig hands here, trying to figure out what the heck they're doing. Spraying water onto the rig. You can see the rig's no longer standing vertical. And they just got through dropping that metal rod down on top of the nitroglycerin, and it did quite well. But the thing is, it allowed this gas zone to bring up all the gas and burn down the rig. So that's the technology back then, and that was in 1929. Other history, what history brings us is data and data information. What are we using for data? Back in 1920s, particularly 1930s, 1929, I came across a book. As a geologist, I'm always grabbing data. When companies go out of business, I'm grabbing data. When there's a museum, I'm going in and doing that. But the data was it may be where, like Tom over here has some information, and he shares it with me. So all of a sudden now there's two people with it. Nowadays you have the internet, so everything's just scattered out all over the place. But the early history, this was like plane tabling. They would have geologists out in the field with a table oriented, make sure it was all right, and they'd have a scope on it, and they'd have geologists go out and look at this rock that was on the surface, and it would be tilted this way or that way, so they would see what the dip is and what strike it is, and they'd be mapping these things. So they would have, back in 1929, the early companies, and even the state of Oklahoma, had these early surface structural maps, and where you can follow these outcrops on the surface. And they thought at the time that the concept was there are, like if you have a buried hill down several thousand feet down below the surface, it's probably pushed up everything else. Thus, what you see on the surface might be what's down below. So they published a bunch of these things. But that's what they used, and along with witching sticks. And one person said if you put all the locations of all the cemeteries on a map and drill on cemeteries, you would find a lot of oil, because they always put cemeteries on top of hills. And in the early exploration efforts, they drilled on top of all these hills, and they would find oil and gas fields because of the structure that was down below it. So it's interesting fact there. That along with that early data, you would have descriptions and of the rocks that they would go through. And this data would be stored in the companies they worked for, until eventually they were given to a library, and they had it in their archives, and eventually where people could get to that. And that's something I use all the time. Early reportings, a typical 1935 card showing where the well was, and more descriptions. This is the description of every day. This is 1949. Every day they had what their depth they went to, and then finally where they were pumping, 22 barrels in 24 hours. And then they perforated, actually ran pipe on that well. And so this is the type of data we're talking about in the early days that we had, that's what they got to use. Now, that created a huge window of opportunity for folks after them, because anybody who could put this data together would be able to get in there and find this oil that hasn't been found. Now we think of when we drill a well and they produce it, you think it's all gone. Most of these wells out here have only found or produced 5% of the oil that's in place. And that's usually because there's a little bit of gas in the oil and gives a little bit of energy, so when they produce it, it comes up pretty quick and then backs off, and now they put a pump on it and the price of oil drops down, can't afford to pump it anymore, company goes out of business or sells it off to somebody else. Anyway, there's no follow-up plumbing, if you will, on these wells, so there's a lot of oil in the ground. So that opens up opportunities for newer technology to come through and kind of help bring that to the surface. Another thing we're looking at, historical data. This is an old well log. This is an electrical sensor that's put down a hole and pulled up real slow. And it's reading the rock fluids, and such as if it has water in it, you'll have low resistivities, and if it has oil in it, you'll have high resistivities. It's reading the rock fluids, and it's also reading what the rock is. A harder limestone might be a real high resistivities. Anyway, and they combine this log with the samples they got, and they would identify what they're actually seeing. Here's a 1929 surface structure. That's a section right there, a full section. And just like you saw that guy with the plane table in the picture earlier, that's what resulted from his plane table work in the field. He's seeing there's some formation on the surface that's tilting and turning and bending, and as a result of something that's down below. And that's that I come across and use that. And now we move to where we're at today. We have many more uses of good old oil, and this picture here just kind of illustrates that, and all the plastics, all the things in pharmaceuticals, and there's a lot more reasons you can go and refine this oil and gas, and we can refine it to become almost anything that we need in the way of plastics particularly. And another thing we have is technology now. This is a three-dimensional picture of some subsurface and some seismic. And with the seismic, we were able to identify these hills. You can see it's like along a ridge. And this, you can see if anybody's flown into Denver and you look at the Rockies right there in front of you, you see that tall ridge of the Rockies. Well, if you look closer, it's actually peaks all along a ridge. That's what you have at depth out here. You have these ridges, and along that you have these little peaks, these hills, and those hills are structural features that you need to be able to attract oil and gas, because oil and gas is going for the highest place, and these are the places where the rocks are draped over the top of it, and that's the oil that's in those porous rocks that comes up to the top of all those places here. And the other thing that we have now in technology, we have newer looking electric logs, where the different tools that we run down a hole and bring up real slow, reading the parameters and characteristics of the rock and the fluid in them. You have things, this is like a Geiger counter here. It's the gamma ray curve, and it will show you, like a lot of shales, there are higher readings, and sands don't have it, they're very clean, so you can see sand shales real easy and correlate it from well to well, giving you real good resistivities and porosities. There's a porosity log where as it kicks to the left, that means it's very porous, in measurements of 10 to 20 to 30%, and that's the holes in between the little sand grains, and that's where you store the oil in the pores. So we have newer technology brings us good well logs. And of course, new technology brings us better ways of drilling, where before we used to put a hole in the ground, and if we're putting that hole in the ground and we come across the zone, it has 1,000 pounds of pressure, that 1,000 pounds of pressure wants to come our way, it blows out. Nowadays, of course, we fill the hole up with fluid, mud, so it keeps a kind of a weight down the whole time you're drilling, so everything's under control. And they're much safer nowadays, but we can evaluate these rocks a whole lot better than newer technology in drilling. And then the newer technology and completions, like what you're very aware of yourself, of the abilities to orchestrate. You have a conductor out on the surface on these wells that brings everybody together at the right time to bring in the sand and water and start pumping and to get the best results for fracking down below so that you can open up the rock. Now, one point that's real important, and a lot of people don't realize, is that you can't frack a rock that doesn't have porosity. Okay? Meaning if we pack this room full of people, we're standing next to each other like this, can't move, and the door opens up, there's not room for anybody else, and it won't even move anybody in here because everybody's already stacked up pretty tight. So if we have space in between us though, and that door opens up, someone's going to lean against somebody and someone's going to lean up against somebody else, and it starts affecting everybody in the room because of someone coming in the door, and that's because there's porosity in between us. There's room in between us, and that's what allows there to be a compression. And so the rocks can be compressed if they have porosity. And so what the fracking is, what it does is it goes in and fracks. It pushes all these pieces of rock close together and allows more of an open space for fluids to come out. And that's what the technology nowadays have done for us, both in vertical wells and horizontal. And so the key is use the old and the new. Don't dismiss the old. It tells you a ton of stuff, and particularly about the rocks. And places that we get data. This is the Geological Survey in Norman, and here's the OPIC, which is, whoops.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, and this right here in OPIC in Norman also, they have all the cores of any cores in Oklahoma that were collected by their drilling, and they're stored here. This is the Geological Library in Edmond, Oklahoma. It has a lot of these, most all those old historical documents that I use all the time. And it takes a little time to go and uncover those things, but it's well worth it.
That's one of the reasons you located your offices now in Edmond, is to be close to that information source.
Right, yeah.
Tell them a little bit about your background. I sent out a bio, but the experience that you've had with the Geological Society, with the blog library and all of that, your positions.
Okay. Well, I'm been independent, like I said, since '83, and part of that being independent is being part of organizations in the geological community, and one of those things is libraries, sustaining a library of all this old information. And my predecessors, the folks that who work for large companies and small, they've been collecting this data and helping the state collect it too. And so I joined them a long time ago, and now this is my 22nd year as being on the board for the nonprofit the Geological Library in Oklahoma City, and as president and past president. And we our goal was to put everything on a digital platform so that the community and for students, universities, and so the state, everybody can get on there and get this data and see this data that they've never seen before. A lot of kids coming out of college, all they do is get pulled into a big company. That company trains them for a specific little thing, and that's it. They have no idea the amount of information that's available out there. And so we're trying to keep it from being stored in a big building and getting it out to the public through the internet. And so I've been a part of that for quite a long period of time. And for myself, for being independent and have been independent for such a long time, what's very important is just integrating myself with those people that have come before me that know more than me. And that's easy. It's about everybody. And so I try to absorb all I can off them, and all the good stuff anyway, but I can't help but absorb some of the other things that they give me, which mostly are stories. And these stories are very important because they kind of tell where they come from and how they have discovered things. And so I've adopted some of those. And that is having defined parameters for approaching a problem and coming up with an idea, because my pockets weren't full of money to go out and pick up acreage or to drill it or run seismic or to do any of the stuff. But my mind was full of the ideas, so I had to go and make sure the ideas were very concrete and very supported, so that other people would want to join me in find this oil and gas. And that's what I've done for a long period of time and enjoyed it so much, and I'll never retire from it. It's just part of what life is. So I've adopted some parameters. And these parameters, first of all, as Bob Northcutt told me before he passed away, he says, if you want to find oil, Mike, go where the oil is. You know, okay.
I've got to interject something
Okay.
here, because some of you may remember back in 09, 10, when I was first getting involved with offering investment opportunities to people, I was actually introduced to Bob Northcutt and hired him as a consulting geologist. Prior to that time, I'd been listening to a lot of other people's stories, running all over and trying to find prospects that made sense. And from friends and people that I knew, and finally I would take these things and I'd show them to Northcutt. And this after he retired. He was real old. His daughter would drive him over to Tulsa, and he said, "This is all." You know, he said, "If you want to find oil, go to where the oil is, proven." And that's coincidentally, I didn't even know that you were referencing Northcutt. You
Yeah,
just
we
said
would,
it.
we'd,
Wow.
we'd have lunch every couple of weeks.
Wow.
And, but he and my first boss, Herb Davis, they worked together at Amoco. And so they had a lot of stories, but they found a lot of oil and gas. And they love to bring people in and talk to them about that. So go where the oil is, where it's been proven. And again, I'm telling you, the area that we're in is one of those old areas that majors have been in for a long time. Another parameter is look for the rocks that have the best porosity and permeability. And okay, what's that mean? Well, first of all, if you have a hard rock, piece of limestone that's as hard as that wall right there, or like this, and I go and I pour water on top of it, none of that water is going in that. There's no porosity. There's no holes in there. And so porosity are the holes in between the little pieces of rock. In this case, think about a bunch of marbles in a bucket. And you can pour water in that bucket and fill it up with water because there's spaces in between those marbles. That's called porosity, okay? And that's where the oil and gas is hanging out at. And so now permeability is, if I were to take that same bucket and turn it up on its end, how capable is all the water able to come back out? It's because it can flow through all those little holes and come on out. So that's permeability. So one of the things that I've done studies in Oklahoma, I went in and found every zone and looked at its porosity and its permeability parameters in itself. And I circled it on a map. I said this Viola zone it flowed to the surface every time because it's very permeable and porous, and Wilcox and Peru, and so I stood back with my map, and this is my COVID, my COVID investigation time for a year and a half. I just hunkered down and came up with ideas, did studies like this, took all the old stuff, put it all in one map, and all these little overlapping areas came to this area right here, and so it became my area that had good porosity, good permeability. What zones? It was Viola and Wilcox down below, and then up above it was some Earlsboro and Sonora sands, which mean maybe nothing to you, but back then, when they were first drilling through those things, they were shallow sands that were meandering channels. And every time they'd meander and get close to one of those deeper structures that we saw on there, well then that channel would fill up with oil at that spot. And so those sands were really porous and permeable. So those were the zones that I circled on the map, outlined, and they all overlapped in this one general area up on the southern part of the Cherokee Uplift, and that's why I'm there. Another thing is flow rates. Flow rates mean how much money goes back in our pockets. And if we are out there and we drill into something that's saturated with oil, but it doesn't have the ability to give it up, well, we're playing with something we shouldn't be playing with there because we can't get it out of the ground. So we need to look at rocks that will give you flow rates, and that's mean it has to have permeability or the ability to frack it. And with modern day techniques to be able to break that rock down so now you can create permeability for all those little porous things to be connected. The other parameter that's important is check your areas of expense. Make a big map of where you can get online and identify what it costs to drill in different areas. And again, looking at areas that you have here, our vertical wells in this area are very inexpensive. and they still are very inexpensive. And a typical well might cost $250,000 to $300,000 to drill it, and then to complete it, about $250,000 or $300,000 to complete it. So by the time you spent $600,000, you have a well out there ready to produce. And so we'll get to that economics here in a second. Another parameter is less expensive completions. I made a big study. Part of my big study was look at the completions. If you had to go in Logan County, and every time you hit the viola there, you had to put a big frack on it, throw a lot of sand in there, a lot of water, and you would spend $80,000, $100,000 on a completion. But if you were to go south, more on the Cherokee platform that we're at, all of a sudden it became very permeable, and you wouldn't need to frack it. You just drop a little acid to clean up around the perforations, and boom, it'd come at you. So that means it was less expensive. And so I looked at areas where they just used acid and they didn't have a big frack on these limestones. So that became another circle on my map. Then another parameter is, let's go with depth. It costs more when you get down to certain depths, and it costs, here I try to stay above 6,000 feet because a lot of rigs may not be able to drill that depth efficiently, or the pipe isn't available, or the cost of services. There's a lot of services that are limited by depth, and so I put in 6,000, above 6,000 feet for my restriction on that. Another parameter is land cost. There are areas in Oklahoma that just got saturated with a bunch of early horizontal drilling, and they were paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $12,000 an acre. Just silly. And it was other people's money from other places that didn't know anything about the oil business, and it just put it like a wet blanket over a large part of the Oklahoma, and which eliminated any other further exploration for many years. So I wanted to stay away from that, and I wanted to get to places where it was only about $150 an acre, which is very good. And the unit sizes. Vertically, usually you can drill a well every 40 acres, as opposed to buying a whole section, 640 acres, at a high price. Another parameter is having enough well data from old and new data, like we were talking about, and so that we can make sure that we're not missing anything. One of the things I learned early on, right after I worked for Herb Davis, he said, look at the rocks, look at the rocks, look at the rocks. So I would go to the library and go through all these strip logs with samples on them, descriptions, and be really using those things. Well, I came up with a great hunting project, and it was like the hunting was on this side of the room, but there was a well drilled on that side of the room that didn't have any hunting. So there was a big wedge that pinched out. And so I said, and there's production here, so I just want to drill in here and find another well or two on that pinch out. So I thought I was pretty smart. So I had my maps getting all set up and stuff, and I did one more look back in the library, and I came across one of these little strip logs that I showed you up earlier, and it had a well that was drilled right here. And it wasn't on any map, none. And there's no record of it, but that one strip log had a well there, and it had the right elevation for that spot, and on the samples, on the top, it said where it was next to town. And the thing was, if I didn't look at that, it was a dry hole. They said no hunting in this well. If I would have drilled that well, or not honored that piece of information, I would have drilled the dry hole. So getting all the available information and making sure you're in the right spot, doing the right things, is very important. Another parameter is make sure that we're looking at prospects now. An idea to drill has to be near another well that has shows in it. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to go offset dry holes, except if you go back and read on those dry holes, and all of a sudden you're reading it, and they tested oil out of 2 or 3 different zones. And they were maybe back in the 50s and so forth, they tested oil, and you now have more data, and now you use those as keys it's a valued key to every prospect. And this is important. We need to have show wells offsetting our features. Another thing is having seismic in the area. Now we have a better ability to shoot seismic and to confirm the size of the prospect. And these hills that you saw, the 3-dimensional hills, we don't know tall they are. The taller they are, the more they can accumulate. And we don't know the geometry of them, but we have wells on the side that have shows in them. So, so what's important here is to be able to run seismic. And we used to run seismic in line. Okay, matter of fact, back in the 20s and 30s and then in the 40s, seismic was run, and they would shoot one seismic point right here. Then they go a half mile away and do another one, then a half mile. And what they do is they set off a dynamite charge here, and then they have a geophone, a sensor right there, so they see with the sound wave go straight down, come straight back up. So that's like if you and I were taking a trip, taking a hike someplace real nice, and all we did is keep our head down like that. All we see is what's right there at our feet. Then in the late 50s, they started developing a CDP type seismic, a linear seismic. So what they did is they put these geophones in this long line, and they had sources along there. So now you had sound waves going down and bouncing up and collecting all along that one line. So that would be like, now we're on taking that same trip, instead of looking straight down, now we're looking straight forward. And let's say we're in a car and all it has is windows on the front and the back. So on your trip, you get to see everything out of the front and the back, nothing on the sides, just the front and the back. And that's how that seismic was. It's just a linear thing. So if you went over a feature, a feature meaning a structure, you would maybe hit the edge of it, but you never get over the top of it. You never knew where the top was. So now we have three-dimensional seismic or lateral seismic, and that's like being in a car with, of course you have windows all the way around, so you can travel in a straight line. You can look all the way around you while you're doing that, and that's what this seismic does that I use to verify, these different prospects. It got a little bit out of control about 10, 15 years ago, where big companies were coming in and said, well, if this works so well, let's just put 100 square miles together and look for something in there. Well, they spent so much money up front that they didn't apply any geology to it. They're just looking for some feature. And so that was the wrong way of using that tool. The correct way of using that tool is to verify these parameters I'm talking about. And so if we have a show well, I want to know which direction I need to go from that show well to get up high and how big it is. And so that's what we're talking, making sure that the seismic is available for us to do that. One last thing is make sure you have experts for helping you interpret the data, bring it in. And that is, if we have a well that's drilled right here, and we know where the viral is or where the Wilcox is, and we ran seismic around it. Well, now we want to tie this piece of information to the rest of the data, and that's where our experts come in. And the last thing is, and most important, is rapid rate of return on investments. Because of the better flow rates, because of the right kind of rock, because of all the parameters I just put out in front of you, my goal was to make sure that any money that went in the ground, came out of the ground, we had it back in our pockets within 9 months or a year. Well, the project I'm showing you today, it's capable of return on investment in 6 months. But this is a goal of mine, because I went to bankers in the last 2 years when I was doing the COVID stuff. I said, what was the biggest thing that investors had complaints about? They said, I never got my money back, or it didn't come back fast enough, or da-da-da-da-da-da, and so forth like that. So getting money back in our pocket because is most valued. So that's another parameter. Out of those parameters, I talked about identifying structures, and this is right off the internet. I thought it was useful, and we're gonna see just quickly how a trap, and it's very similar to what we're looking for. And let's see if it pops up.
I don't think we have the connectivity here.
Oh,
We didn't have
okay. Well, let's
so-
go back to this. Okay, we'll use this. Layers of rock in the ground, rig up here, but you get these layers of rock that used to be level. But because of compression, they start wrinkling up like that. They make hills down below, and and you'll have maybe a porous rock here, and then on top of it you have one that's not porous. So they have a trap. But now this oil and gas is trying to come up to the highest point. So what it does, it comes up in this zone right here and starts collecting. Here's your oil, and gas will be at the top and water will be down here. But at the top of all these little buried hills, you're going to have this all trapped oil and gas right there. And so the bigger the feature, the more column of oil you have. The smaller feature, less oil. And and the other thing we were talking about is we want to be where the oil is. Well, this is a square mile right here. And everything in purple, in this, on this case, is one of the viola zones that I was talking about. And you can just see there's a trend coming through here. I work with trends. I don't want to step away from trends because that's getting off that mountain ridge. We're talking about looking at flying into Denver and seeing the Rockies up there. I don't want to get away from the top of the Rockies, out in the middle of the plains. There's no oil trapped there. I want to be up there where that is, and that's what we want to do here, be where the oil is. The other things are talking about porosity and permeability. Here's some porous, permeable rock. Matter of fact, I brought it with me, that picture. And that you can just see the holes in this rock, and that's viola. The top of the viola, it's karsted up. It has bugs in it, and that's what we're looking for. This kind of stuff, and the stuff that has real good porosity joined to it. But we have modern day logs that will see exactly what that rock is. Also, we're talking about the expense for vertical wells. It's much less, and the completions are cheaper, and staying above 6,000 feet. One of our first projects I'm showing you is, here's the offset well. And these are layers of rock, and this is the cap rock in green here. It's sylvan, it's a waxy shale, nothing can go through it. So that's the ceiling for the oil to be trapped. Here's an offset well that have shows in these zones. And how deep are they? We're 3,000 feet, 2,800 feet, 2,600 feet. And so very economic to go chase. Also, this is a 40-acre tract. That's a square mile. And so we pick up our acreage, and it's $150 an acre instead of $1,500 an acre or $15,000 an acre. It's very reasonable in this area. It hasn't been introduced to a lot of horizontal drilling. Also, the availability of subsurface data. Our prospect, here's the East Asher prospect, and here's the Lee Springs prospect. And I'll be brief about that, but you can see that there's wells all around the structural features. That's a buried hill. There's a buried hill. Right here, here's a buried hill with the top being in here. But what were we looking for? Offset wells with shows. Here's the two wells that produced out of a shallow zone and made 26,000 barrels of oil at 2,200 feet. That's above our main zone, and this well here had shows in our viola, that rock I was just showing you. And we're right next door, and this is where the anticipated structure is and where we could produce. Well, how much could it produce? We don't know. We need to evaluate it, and that's where seismic comes in. But let's look at something nearby. Just to the south, a half mile, is a well that was drilled in 1982 out of the viola. It produced 116 barrels a day. It made 266,000 barrels of oil. It's still producing 16 barrels a day right now.
Wow.
Okay? Why?
Those are the kind of wells we want to find. 250,000 barrels on a 3,400 foot well.
And it only has one zone, and that zone is only from the floor up to my hand. That's how thick it is. And so it's so porous and permeable, it's collecting oil on a small little feature, and that's what it's doing. We have another feature up here with shows on the flanks, which are just like these wells here on the flanks. They're shows. We want to move in an up-dip position and do the same thing here. Same thing for our East Asher. We have down-dip wells that are on the flank of this hill, and they have oil. Free oil on one test, free oil on another test in our viola. And so we need to find out which way to go. I think I know which way to go, and that's why I put together specific projects so that we can run seismic. Now, a seismic is modern day now. We have, instead of just using dynamite, which dynamite usually we drill a hole about 8 foot deep put dynamite in the bottom, maybe 10 pounds, put gravel on top, and we set off a charge in it, and at the same time, when it goes off, well then we have other ones that go off, and we have geophones all over the place, listening down on the ground like stethoscopes all over the place. They're all tied in together. Or we have a vibra-sized truck. This is a vibra-sized truck, and you see right here in the middle, this thing sets down on the ground, makes good contact with the ground, starts vibrating. And it vibrates slow and then faster and faster. So those are different frequencies of sounds that are going down on the ground. And they'll be done in 10 minutes, and then they'll just drive along and do it again. And each time they do that, all these geophones out there are listening. So we get data, and then we get more data, and we keep on putting all that data together until it gets really clear. And we end up with seismic. Each one of these little squiggles here is a ray trace, meaning sound wave that went down and came back up. And matter of fact, this seismic right here, you can see that there's a structure down below coming up and going down, and that happens to be this line right here. And see what's happening? It shows us coming up dip. And how much is that? It's probably 30 foot. That's significant because if it comes up 30 foot right there, and we're not, it tells us there's a structural feature here someplace, and that's the edge of it. We went right over the edge of it. So that shows that the seismic works really well in this area, and we're real close. And so, and of course, like I was illustrating here, the fiber size will send sound waves down, and they'll bounce off different layers and come up to sensors on the surface, and we'll tie them in with wells that have been drilled here so that we know the bilo is here, and the seismic says that's the highest point, and we can map it out three-dimensionally. Bingo, that's our verification. That's how we're using the seismic, different from a lot of other people who just put it across the countryside. We're specifically identifying places to go in and find exactly what a parameter says, which is structure. And this is just an illustration. It's on the internet. I used it. We can't use it here, but it's illustrating sound waves going down, bouncing off different layers of rock. Economics. What comes out of our pocketbook, we need to make sure we get back enough so we can get a bigger pocketbook. I used $105 oil, subtracted out the taxes and all the other state taxes and everything else, net revenues, and I used $80 oil here. So we're going to eliminate all the taxes. So $80 oil, and for one well, we're saying that's going to produce 50 barrels a day. Of course, the well we saw on my map was 116 barrels a day. So I backed it off to 50 barrels a day. So we'll take this well and 50 barrels a day at $80 times 50 barrels. We're making $4,000 a day of revenue, okay? And drilling and completion cost for that well was $600,000. So now we have $600,000 spent drilling and completing. We divide that by the 4,000, and we end up with payout in 150 days. 180 days is half a year, so 5 months. This well would pay out at the 50 barrels a day, and now we're ready to be maybe drilling offsets. Return on investment for that single well, if that well produces 30,000 barrels of oil, it will make $2.4 million in profit. That's using the after taxes. Again, 30,000 barrels of oil will make $2.4 million in product, and that is a 4-to-1 on return on that well. So I want to illustrate, if you just think on per well basis. Now we have other costs to go into that, or if we drill multiple wells, there's other costs, but I wanted to let you get a feel for what we're looking at right here. So on a well by well basis, at least a 4-to-1. And of course that other well made $266,000, not $30,000. It made $266,000, 8 times more than that. So 8 times more. You're almost at 30 million bucks. I mean, quickly.
Okay, Mike, those are the kind of returns we want. So let's make sure we identify those structural highs.
I knew he was going to say that. Okay, so let's look at that was the single well, and again it was covering the making $4,000 a day, dividing into your $600,000 you're spending, and your return on investment is 4.1. Now, if we put in 3 wells, and that's what the Asher prospect is, 1 well, 1 feature we're looking for to verify with the seismic, and the Lee Springs has 2 of these structures. So we have 3 structures we want to identify with the seismic and drill on top of. So I put 3 wells into it. And so I still use the 50 barrels a day, the $80 oil, 3 wells. Remember, the cost for 1 was $600,000, drilling completed, so 3 times that is spending $1.8 million to drill those 3 wells and complete them. The seismic acquisition cost for all 3 projects to go in and do all that is much less than that, but I put $250,000. Now that's the cost for going out there and shooting our 3 little projects. Surface damages and other related things, $50,000. And so I'm really kind of padding this thing. It's more expensive than it would be, but for the total cost, we're looking at $2.1 million. 3 wells are drilled. They've all been verified. These 3 positive features down below that should have oil in them are sitting there for us to drill, and we drill all 3, and that's what we spent, $2.1 million.
Mike,
Yes,
hold on a second. Let me, so people will understand what we're looking at here today. The entity, Total Seismic Partners, is going to initially put up the funding. We've already made a deposit toward that to pay for the leasing and the seismic for 3 separate prospect areas, which is what we're referring to here. Upon in the total offering amount, the amount of money that we're raising now will be $300,000. That's 30 units at $10,000 a unit. For that $10,000 unit, let's assume that we identified 3 drillable prospects, 1 in each of the areas. Then there would be, then you take the 1.8 million to drill the 3 wells. We are going to sell off a portion of that. David Robertson has already agreed. He likes the prospect. He and Mike have had a previous relationship. Mike actually did contract geology for several years with Dave when he took over the family business, what, about 25, 30 years ago? Long time. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but the point is the initial offering is a fraction of what you will potentially be investing upon the identification of the prospect. So a $10,000 investment today, if we drilled all 3 wells, would be an additional $50,000 investment that you would be entitled to, not obligated, but you would have the right to participate in 5 additional units with a proportional interest of that in 3 separate wells. So just wanted you to know how the numbers here were working together. Any questions on our capital structure and how we're doing that?
So this is what we're doing. What we're illustrating here is we're all part of the process. We're not coming in after the fact and being charged more money. What we're doing is right now you're being part of what's ground floor. So we're going in. We've identified, using all my parameters, we've identified these features that should produce like we want to, and now we're going to go and enhance that and evaluate it with the seismic specifically on each one of these things. If they all show what we want to, well, then we drill all 3 wells, and later on we can develop it after that, but we'll drill these 3 wells. If we were to find out that 2 of them were shot and they came up with our 2 features, well, then we'd be drilling those 2 features and not drill that 3rd one. So we're eliminating some risk here, and you're participating in the flow of recognizing these projects as we go along here. And so, what I've brought to you is try to reduce that risk to this point. And also what I like about this investment is that if the payout, if you had that total cost of $2.1 million divided by $80 oil, that means in order to get the $2.1 million back, that oil, you need to make 26,000 barrels of oil. Now,
in one well.
In any well, 26,000 barrels of oil. Remember what that other well made offsetting our Asher? 266,000 barrels of oil. So, and the average wells in our local area are closer to 50,000 barrels on average, on a per zone basis. So we just need to make 26,000 barrels of oil. Matter of fact, that 26,000 barrels of oil, I wanted to make sure you realize that if you go for 50 barrels a day of a well, and make all 3 wells productive at 50 barrels of these producers, you're paying off the entire project in 175 days. So that's giving you a perspective on why we're doing it like we are. We've identified good features, everything we can possibly do. Now we're going to verify with seismic and drill those that fit our parameters. And so that means, let's go be devil's advocate here. Let's say there are 3 features, everything should have worked, and all of a sudden we only found 1 structure. Okay? Well, if we drill that 1 well, and it makes 26,000 barrels of oil, it paid for everything. Paid for the other 2 wells, dry holes, paid for the site, it paid for everything. So that's what's fun about this, because we're going in and giving ourselves 3 chances, 3 opportunities to find a field. And we know what these fields look like. We're right in the same area with these fields. And we're high grading our idea so that we can come out way ahead. But that's why those parameters are so important, because it makes a lot of sense now to go out there and look for oil.
One other point I want to make is that the initial well in each of these prospect areas, if it's productive and we have the seismic definition of the structure, from that point we'll be able to go forward and drill additional wells within the identified structures, and they could be several wells per prospect area. And obviously the people that are the investors in Total Seismic Partners will have the first right of participation. Everything that is at cost, everything is heads up in all of the additional well development. That's where the big upside is. Identify a conventional prospect on structure at cost, and the numbers are potentially fabulous. So anyway, this is just ground floor to identify, starting with the 3 prospect areas.
So, okay, so I've tried to illustrate in a short period of time what I spend all my time doing and enjoy doing is refining ideas down to a place where I would spend my own money. As a matter of fact, I'm spending my money with whomever's going to be in these things. I'm going to be in there with you, and that's the way I augment my ideas. And why should I not take a part of my own idea? So the Leaf Spring. Let's talk about the people involved. Of course, Total Seismic Partners is the investment capital of the project, and MKB LLC is the LLC that myself and my partner, with landman Bobby Cox, and we'll be taking care of all the geology of the land ourselves, and also all the Oklahoma Corporation Commission requirements that take us right up to it. The process of pooling and spacing the lands and all the intents, we'll be doing that. So we're not contracting that out to anybody. We're doing that ourselves like we normally do. The seismic, Star Geophysics, will be managing and processing our seismic. Those are people that I work with all the time. Another thing is Eagle Exploration is the contracted seismic. They're the ones with the thumper. They're the ones with that driver-sized truck. They're the ones that get the people out there and locate all the geophones and bring all and create the data. And then our operator is Dave Robertson Oil Company. And so there you have the team that you're a part of, and that has all of us are closing on 50 years experience each on doing what we do. The program itself, okay, how do we get there? We get there by purchasing the acreage and covering the prospect areas, which, like Scott already said, he's already initiated that, and we have landmen out in the field picking up that acreage and already starting to get the permits.
You already have some of that acreage already procured.
Yes, on the Leaf Springs prospect, we have all the acreage in hand, and it will expire at the end of this year because we bought it 2 years ago. 3 years, 2 years ago, excuse me. It was a 3-year lease, And so we will be renewing that acreage. We already have purchased, so we just contact them and just tell them we want an extension. And so we will be getting that acreage and the acreage up to the north in East Asher. We'll be getting new. We already leased that and it just expired, and we will be going and releasing those acres. So all this acreage we've already leased before, so we know the folks, we know the cost, and so that'll be much easier to do. Then we'll go out there and get the permits. We have to have permits to go across the land. And we'll conduct the survey. And it only takes, for each one of our areas, it may take 4 or 5 days. And all these geophones will be out there. As a matter of fact, now the geophones, they used to be connected with wires, each one of these little geophone sensors on the ground. Now it's all connected via the net. So it's all being put up into online, goes right into the trucks. We're automatically getting data, so we can see if it's good data or not, and we can manipulate the field conditions to make the best.
Part of the advantage we have on the seismic survey is that the company that's going to run it is already scheduled to be in our location or nearby on another seismic shoot, and we can tag along with them. So we're already set up that we should have all the seismic shot on our 3 areas within, Mike, 60 days?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're ready to go.
In the process, we're going to go and we're going to look at the offset geology that's available, meaning those show wells, and incorporate them into the seismic so we know exactly what we're seeing, how high can we get to that show well. And then the next thing we're going to do is we'll have this representation, a map, which all of you would be seeing. You'll see what's produced from each spot. We'll see if I'm right with my subsurface, anticipating where the structure is. And we'll find out where the highest point is, and we'll make sure that's our first location on each of the 3 features. And then we'll also be able to see how big each one will be, so we can anticipate offset wells in the future. We'll also, and we're going to identify those features. We'll go out there and make sure our spacing, our poolings are correct, meaning with spacings, we get 1 well in each 40, and we'll have those of record, if you will, and we'll be ready to drill. Also, we'll go out there and stake all these locations and have it okayed by the commission. We'll settle surface damages that cost in places where we may have to cut down some trees, a path, or whatever it is, or something like that. Well, then we pay a little bit more to get through those areas, heavily wooded areas. Then we'll start drilling. And these wells will only take a week.
We're anticipating the drilling to take place toward the end of the year. So from a cash flow standpoint with respect to other investments we have, we should be in a position, and also from a timing standpoint with respect to being able to take the tax deduction. The year-end schedule or toward year-end or a prepayment for first quarter is the way we'll implement our drilling program.
And then we'll evaluate the well. I'll be out there. We'll have geologists, well site geologists. We'll have all the rocks that came up we're taking a look at. We have the mud detection devices that says what came up in the mud, mole shows, gas shows. We'll have, and we'll run logs, full suite of logs to identify the physical characteristics of the rocks down below. And we may even run some drill stem tests, meaning that's where you go down the hole with a pipe and open it up to the formation with no pressure on it, kind of like the old days where you see the gusher come in. Well, when you open it up with no pressure, it allows fluids to come in for a short period of time. Then you close it up and bring it to the surface and see what's there. And that only costs like $3,000 per zone. So these are things we might use, and but what I'm illustrating is those are the evaluations that we'll be doing at the end of the well. And we'll look at the drill time, the mud, and that's our decision point. Now, in horizontal wells, there's no decision point. You're just drilling a well and you're setting pipe. Okay? In this situation with these conventionals, you're drilling the hole. You're not setting the pipe yet because you're
looking at all these conditions. Have they all been met? Does it look like it's gonna be a good well? Has it met all the parameters that we already set forth? If it does, then you've spent $250,000 at that point. Now you can make a decision of moving forward, which is the other $250,000, which will do pipe in the hole and everything on the surface you need to produce it. And then it's online for production. And so the projects we're talking about is the Lee Springs project, and this is a square mile, and these are 40-acre locations. This is the offset wells with shows in them. Looks like go up dip in this direction. There's a fault right here, and when you get on the other side of the fault, it drops down 300 feet. Just imagine being right there and looking over the edge. It's a football field down. And so we're on the high side here and have shows, so something in here is trapped. The same thing for these two wells. And there's a fault coming across here, and there's a structural feature someplace in here, and this is where we anticipate drilling. And next door, this is a new field. 2017, this was drilled up real quick. And in yellow, that's the Wilcox zone that's down a little bit deeper at 2,200 feet. The blue in here is the Viola. And in the first 16 months, I took some recordings. The first 16 months, they had made between 20,000 and 27,000 barrels of oil. But this company here didn't report really what it was making. They tried to keep it down. They didn't want competition out there, but I'm out there.
I think it's real important to understand here, and know that obviously a lot of small oil companies out there think this is Gulf exploration. And again, put a point on the map where our comp is. They came in there in 2017, did the same thing we're doing, but they did it without seismic. They went out there, they tried to save the money, do it on the cheap, and they drilled, I think, 2 dry holes before they hit one. Where they got high on structure, they were able to find the structure the hard way through drilling multiple wells. But they have since drilled, what is that, 5, 6, 7 producers?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That since 2017 have produced almost 300,000 barrels of oil.
200,000.
Well, 198.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
200,000.
and so the way this was found, a friend of mine sold this project to him. And here's our Asher project. Remember this? We have my show well's not showing up. But this project up here, we anticipate there being a feature because there's offset shows in these wells, and there's that seismic line. Remember on that seismic line right here, we saw the structure, so it's on the flank again. Well, the same thing happened with this feature right here. Is they had a seismic line that was going north-south through here, and right there, they had the same thing we had right over here. So instead of running any more seismic, they went and drilled right there. And then the next well they did is over here. And they made a small producer out of something shallow. So they went the wrong way. So now they're on their 3rd well, and they came over here and had this Wilcox produced out 2 zones. So they drilled 1, 2, 3 wells before they figured out something was over here. And then the next thing they did was they jumped over here and drilled this, which was too low and didn't produce out of anything but a shallow zone. So now they drilled 4 wells. Now they know they have to come back between here and here and drill. So what we're eliminating is dancing out here spending money. What we're doing is we're going to go in and specifically use a seismic to identify our feature and how high it is, so we can drill the top of these features here and the top of this East Asher field right here and make money. So what I hopefully I've got across to you is that you're part of the process, and the process involves parameters we must have met, and we're on the last parameter, which is it's new technology as of 10 years ago, but we've refined it and we've been using it, and it's been working real well, and we have an opportunity to use it here, and it should find us. This is a formula that I'd like to continue to use in the future, and that is finding multiple features to go in and, by design, be able to take 2 or 3 shots like this, where only one, if it hits, it pays for everything. And so, I have my desires here, we ought to be able to be in real good shape with all three, with going in and evaluating this with our seismic and getting our first wells drilled. Any questions?
A lot of information.
Yes, yes.
So is there pipe that we can get product to market in since it's a proven, resource play or?
Yes, there's infrastructure all over out here. He's wanting to know if there's pipelines we can hook into.
Yeah,
But
there's-
of course, these are not big gas prospects.
No, we have no gas,
Oh, no gas.
no gas. These are oil, and it's like 36, 34 gravity oil. And here's the Lee Springs. Route 3 is right here. There's Asher, town of Asher, Canadian River is right up here. Route 3 is over here, and then just down here about 15, 20 minutes is Ada, Oklahoma. Okay, so we have, on the surface, we have, good roads, and this is all, like I said, it was all part of the trends out here, so there's a lot of infrastructure. There's disposal wells, if we have water we want to put water into it. We have all the companies that do all the services are right here in Asher or Ada, so that's why this is a good area, keep a cost down that way.
Mike, how many acres you got on the company and lease around each site after?
Right now we have about 100 acres in here, and we're going to extend those 100 acres and pick up some peripheral acreage in here so that we have the opportunity to run seismic. On this one, our acreage just expired right in here, so we're purchasing this acreage, and we'll have about 200 acres we're going to pick up in here, and so you're talking about 1,000 acres, and peripheral acreage, add another 300 to it, so it might be 1,300 acres total after it's all said and done.
Well, let me ask you this, have you proven wells before in this manner?
Yes, yeah, and where, like I said, I used my COVID time to go in and really set up a plan to be able to use what has worked in the past and with friends that I have found oil with. And so it's proven technique, it works, and right now we have an opportunity to get in ahead of the crowd just because the oil prices goes up. Now we get a lot of people that fly through trying to do things. And so we're ahead of them right now, and we have all those different parameters in front of us. We can go into the best spots, and this is a formula that's been used over and over again, but it's only been used on a prospect by prospect basis in the past. So we have an opportunity to expand on that.
But part of the example here is we've got offsetting right here, someone else, Gulf Exploration, that did the same thing, and they did it without the seismic interpretation, and it cost them an extra $1 million or more to drill 3 dry holes before they found the structure top. So doing it this way is a much more highly defined, lower risk way to do it. It just, most people don't want to spend $250,000 up front to run the seismic. In our case, it makes a lot of sense.
Typically, in this area, there are a lot of competitors in the past, and what was very common was a competitor might go in here and they would see a show well, and they would pick up the acreage right next to it, and they would go and just drill it. And so, like this one, they went and drilled it, and they ended up a well that didn't go in the right direction, and it had shows also, but they just offset it, and they didn't run any seismic. Sometimes a competitor, a person, they'll come in here and they have one well, and they think the structure's right here, so they run one seismic line. Remember, that's like my analogy of being in a car that only has windows on the front and the back, so that's all you see. And so that's all they saw along here. They said, okay, it looks like it's going up. But it was going up, but it wasn't going on top of the feature. So they drilled that, and it's a dry hole. So that's typically how a lot of folks have worked in the past, because they don't have to spend too much money to do it. They just go ahead and drill it. That's not what we're doing here. We're looking for features now that can be identified specifically for holding oil and gas, and that's why all those parameters I went through.
Something to realize, I don't think I need to say this, but I need to. The maps that you've received, in particular, this map, which is the map you're seeing on the screen, this is highly confidential proprietary information, because falling into the wrong hands, we could have unscrupulous landmen, I think that's their nature, that would easily swoop in and try to take up acreage to get underneath our play. So remember, everybody can take these home, but don't just show them to, but be very confidential with this information. Mike has worked, I think part of what comes through here, he's worked years on this prospect. And we're at the point now, why wasn't it drilled before? Well, think about it, pandemic. 2 years ago at this time, we were getting $12 for oil and 37 cents for gas. Nobody wants to drill a well then. Now everybody wants to drill a well. We're getting ready to see oil maybe 150, 200. Everybody wants in a deal like this. But he's been working on it for years, kept it alive, fine-tuned it, and utilizing information that a lot of the younger guys and a lot of the fly-by-nights, they don't even know about. I mean, the 1920s topographical surveys. I mean, Mike has employed every technique possible to identify a prospect way above and beyond what you normally see. And that's what impressed me when he showed us this in the office the first day.
It's common sense, but like my dad said, common sense isn't so common. But if you have questions, I have my cards right here. So if you want to get home and you have some questions, you want to holler at me on any of this stuff, please do. Is there anything?
Also, guys, right here, the first map I gave you, Greg Ripple, another geologist, by the way, that Mike, you and Greg used to office right next to each other.
Yeah, we've known
in
each other.
downtown Oklahoma City. So you guys go back, 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. Anyway, here's the updated agri-resource area map. A lot of the analogies that you see here in terms of let's get on trend. Let's get to where the oil's been found. We know that we have a trend right through here. It shows the plots of our new wells, has updated production figures. Anyway, this is a reference point on our 2021 fund, and for that matter, all the wells in the agri-resource area that we're a participant in. And then, of course, the 3 new prospects here. Okay, questions on anything and everything? It's getting toward the end of the day. It's after 1 o'clock, so.
Let me ask you this, Mike, have you looked at the logs on the 2 wells that just drilled?
On the offset wells?
No, the 2 wells, the 2 wells that were just drilled and in the process of fracking.
No, I have not. I know that area. I know Greg and I have talked about it. The geologist that's running that thing, and the zone that they were intending to penetrate, they have their own gas in it that they can frack. They stayed in that zone pretty well, so they should be able to, the frack job ought to frack that zone like it's done before and cause the permeability to be enhanced to bring back good flow. So that they were in the right rock. That's what I do know. As for logs, no, I didn't take a look at the logs. And I'm not sure they ran logs in that.
Well, he's talking about the mud log.
Oh, mud log.
They're running the mud logs that went along.
I noticed it from the report, and the mud log had, you can see on the mud logs when you get a report, of course it's vertical on your screen on your computer, but if you just imagine that thing being turned sideways, and so they're drilling like this through this rock, and they're going like this, and they think they're trying to stay level or just go up a little bit, but that the geology down there, the rock itself, the zone is like this. It rises, it might go down a little bit, go like that, and the porous part may be down 30 foot into it, so it's going to be going up and going down a little bit, and you never know. But when you're going horizontally through it, when you're cutting through that porosity, all of a sudden you cut through the porosity and you get shows. So in the mud log, you see a lot of gas shows. And then all of a sudden it goes to the bottom of it and the shows disappear. Then it comes back up and you get shows in the mud log. And so each time on a mud log, when you're looking at it, you get a bunch of oil and gas coming into the mud log. And that's just showing you that they're wiggling back and forth in that zone. And they don't have to be in that zone to produce it because they can be in the zone right next to it. And it's very frackable. So all that do is be close to it and go in and out of it every once in a while. And that frack will bring everything into that overlap. But first, the important thing is on your mudlarks, you got to see those shows. That means you've gone through that rock and you're close to it. So
And we did get a lot of good shows.
Yeah, I looked
But,
at
you know, the last well we drilled, one of the concerns, and I tried to address it, I talked to Greg at some length. We got a really kind of erratic shows or no shows in part of it. And I talked to Greg, and it was because part of it was an electrical interference issue. And you could tell by looking at it, it wasn't giving you proper readings. But the point is, in a horizontal, as long as you stay in your target zone, even if you're not getting immediate shows, you keep it in the zone, you're going to frack into it. So it's a different, understand, what we're doing here is called conventional development. What we do on the horizontal wells with Robertson is unconventional development. And there are two different, really, schools of thought and methodology. A lot of the vertical guys, a lot of the conventional oil guys, they hate the horizontal guys, you know, because they spend a lot of money, a lot of times don't get a good return on their money, but they spend a lot. Although, you know, your completion rates, we participated in 70, 80, 90 wells, horizontal. Virtually all of them made wells. I mean, 95, 97% completion rate of producible commercial wells. Now, some of those are better than others. The thing is, if you hit a good well in a conventional well, and you're not spending $3 million or $2.5 million like what we're spending on those, you spend $600,000 and you get 100 barrel a day well. Voila, get your money back in just a few months. I mean, I remember Wayne, that's where we reconnected with Wayne Ingram. First well Wayne drilled, it was a pin sand, in a prospect that I looked at, it was a pin sand. It was back when oil hit $147 a barrel, July of '08, and he hit a boomer, and it paid out in 3 weeks. Now, that's what you can do with a conventional well if you hit up a pressured up structure. And that's, Mike has put, I've seen, Dave Robertson said the same thing. Mike is the hardest working geologist he knows. He puts more into it. He burns the midnight oil, and he puts more effort into his prospects, and that's what shows there's a tremendous amount of work that you're just saying the top of the iceberg here to come up with these prospects.
Well, there's, to add a little comment to, thank you. To add a little comment about the horizontal and vertical drilling. Vertical drilling has been around for a long time. Horizontal drilling has come in with technology. Horizontal drilling has been misused. And that is, it's been used inappropriately for projects. This would be a wrong area for horizontal projects, because we already have found the rocks that don't need to be fracked. Remember, that was one of my parameters. We want to reduce our cost on the completion end of this thing. Drop a little acid on it, enhance the porosity, permeability of the porosity of the So places where horizontal prospects are appropriate are drilling rocks that have a lot of porosity, but they're not connected. And so you have to go down there and drill a lot of the rock, and you frack it so it all becomes connected. And so there's certain areas, like over there in Payne County and so forth, that have that kind of rock properties, and that's appropriate for doing horizontal drilling. So this area here is not appropriate for horizontal drilling, because my parameters said we don't want to be having to go horizontal to frack this stuff. We want vertical completion, so it's cheaper, and these are the zones that will flow. Other zones don't flow, and those what you need to do horizontal fracks in. So you have to use your common sense, go in areas and where you can use that technology appropriately and not just spend money.
So anyway, to summarize, the best you can hope for in an oil deal is to find a free-flowing, low-cost, shallow, pressured up, virgin reservoir. That's what we're focused on. That's what Mike's focused on with all his parameters. And we're in an area, as Bob Northcutt said, go to where the oil is, prolific, on trend. We know all of these structures will produce if you're on top of the structure. Utilizing the 3D seismic, which to get this 3D seismic for the price we're getting it is an outstanding bargain. We'll be able to identify those structure tops and go right in and pinpoint it. And chances of completions in that respect are high.
Yeah, very high, yeah.
So that's a whole different deal, a lot of it. Now, realize the 2021 fund has those Cooley Field wells in it. Those are conventional wells. Those are deep. Those like, you don't know about these, or you might have read about them, Mike, but they're, trying to remember, 13,000 feet vertical, and they're in the Wilcox, upper and lower, in a high porosity, high permeability. Those are conventional type wells, and they free flow, and they'll free flow for a long time. So we've had a touch of vertical or conventional development in some of our funds, and 2021 funds an example of that with those Cooley wells.
Again, if you have any questions, call me.
I have some questions.
Passed around there? Okay, good. Grab, I think they're being passed around, but go ahead and give me a call, and we can revisit on any part of this you want.
We'll be here too after lunch. Mike and I will be both here, and we can discuss. Any questions with respect to the investment structure on how we're doing this? Yes, sir.
If we're gonna invest, how soon do we need to get our money available to, like,
Soon.
soon?
Yeah. Yeah, real soon, because we're paying for all this stuff now.
Right, all right.
I've already advanced 45,000 on this deal.
Right,
Yeah.
all right.
So
So when do you expect to have this written up?
I'm going to have a presentable document probably within a few days. I was hoping to have something today, but you know how things get jammed up. But it's going to be pretty simple. Pretty simple. The full-blown offering memorandum will probably be done. Will be done prior to drilling the big wells. But I'll have we're forming a new entity, which we've already done the name reservations, setting up a bank account. All the logistics have to be done, but very quickly. Because I mean, these guys are moving. The landman's out there writing checks now. We're making deposits. We're going to have to pay for the guys to do the thumper to go out there and thump everything. So.
But because we know, these are the same people we've been doing projects in the past one by one. They know us, so we told them our plan was to be able to drill wells by the end of the year. And so we need to have, we need to have the seismic completed, and so they're catering to us because we've been in business, doing business with them for a long time. So that's a benefit we have. And it extends even to Dave Robertson as operator. So you have a team that I've illustrated here, a team of people that have been working together for a long time, and this is an opportunity to benefit from that.
In terms of prospect qualification, what he just touched on, I talked to Dave. Of course, I approached Dave with this after I talked to Mike and asked him if he'd be interested. We exchanged information and went through the geology. Anyway, and a lot of back and forth. Dave really likes the prospect. He wants to, obviously, just like we all do, we want to see that seismic before we drill it. But we'll have a further confirmation process because it won't be just us and Mike. It'll be our operator, Robertson, that's going to be looking at it with his geologist, and there'll be a lot of, and all that, and you guys will get that interpretation, and then it's your option if you want to invest more, or if you don't. I mean, right now, what you're doing is just putting up the initial dollars, and for some of our partners that may not be in for a 6-unit deal, we can do a half unit for the seismic, which then the balance of the participation would be 25,000. And so it'd be a total of what, 30,000 as opposed to 60,000. But anyway, try to make it affordable for all our partners. Okay.
I'd tell you one, before leaving, a fun story, telling you about using old data with new ideas. I was over just south of this area, and I was doing my own field geology. I was walking out there, and I was looking at the surface, and it just rained, and so finally the sun's coming out a little bit, and I'm hearing some strange noises out there in the field, and bubbles. I'm hearing bubbles. I thought, what the heck is this out here in the middle of nowhere? And I see some cows over there and stuff. And so I walked up where these bubbles were. It's an area that probably was about 150-foot circle, and there was water sitting in this thing. It was only about that deep, but bubbles were coming up in this water. And I was going, what the heck? So anyway, I had a Gatorade bottle with me, so I filled it full of water and took it and put it over the top of one of those little bubbles. The holes were about, I put my finger into, did like that. In about 10 seconds, those bubbles displaced everything in the bottle. So I put the cap on real quick, duct taped it up real good to seal it, and I took it back to town. But before I left, I had gone down the way here because I knew the farmer down here was 90-some years old. I said, was there a well drilled up here? he says, oh yeah, when he was a kid, there was a well drilled up here someplace, and it was blowing out. It was gas. It was blowing out. And it's back when they started off drilling back then, they had to, because there's different water zones down below, they started off with pipe that was about 18 inches diameter. And as soon as they drilled down to a sand, they had too much water in it, it just fell up, they couldn't drill anymore. They'd cement that in and then get a smaller bit and smaller pipe, and they'd keep on telescoping on down, and they got down to 3,400 feet finally, and they went, there were holes about 3 inches at that time, and they all of a sudden they hit this Cromwell zone, this old channel sand that was full of gas, and it came at it, it started blowing, and the farmer said it was blowing for a full month. It was blowing out all this gas, and they finally were able to cap it, and they couldn't produce it. It was just too strong, and that was back in the 20s, 1929. Matter of fact. So I said, well, could you point to where you think it is? Well, it's just south of the road. It was just where these bubbles were coming up, and so I took my Gatorade bottle back to Oklahoma City to the lab. They can go and look at the molecular makeup of that gas, and they were able to tell me that it was the gas from the Cromwell Formation, which was just the depth that they drilled to. So here, what I collected was gas from the zone that I was looking for out there. So it was like a present day test, DST, on a 1929 well. So when I put that prospect together, I said I want to twin this well, and here I have a DST. I have a modern DST. I have proof there's gas there, and they're all looking at me like, who did this? I mean, where did this come from? And how'd you know that well was there? I said, well, this 90-some-year-old guy told me there was a well up there. But because he told me that, I was able to go to the geologic library, and down in the other drawers they had more of these strip logs. I found a strip log from a well that was drilled there in 1929. It shows other gas zones in there, but that big gas zone down there, and it said it blew out for a month on there, which is exactly what the old guy said. So anyway, I sold that prospect, and it was a discovery. It was one of the only Wilcox producers in the whole county, and that was one of the lowest zones. But it was my key well was one that nobody knew was there, except for a 90-year-old on the corner, and me who saw bubbles coming up out of the ground. The reason why the bubbles were coming up because that old well just wasn't quite plugged good enough, so the old gas was seeping up through the cement and came up to the surface. And I just happened to be there after a rain, and so that was a fun story. Anyway, the discovery.
Okay, any other questions? I want to thank everybody for being here today. Great meeting. And Mike, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation and sharing all of this in-depth research that you've done. I think,
Good to meet you.
we're all excited about it.
Thank you, Mike.
All righty. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your desserts.